Today we're going to create a beautiful painterly portrait using the B10x and a technique called painting with light. Hey everybody, Lindsay Adler here, and I love being inspired by other photographers' techniques. I can always learn by looking at someone else's images. And one of the photographers that I am absolutely in love with their work is named Paolo Roversi. Now, Paolo Roversi regularly uses a technique called painting with light. And fundamentally what that means is that he is using a very long exposure. And then during that long exposure, he's carefully painting in where the light is going to be in this scene. And you can do this with a variety of tools. Now, painting with light is not just Paolo Roversi's technique, but I think he is second to none. Like, he is the best of the best because his images are romantic, they're mysterious, they're painterly. I love what his subjects look like. And I don't know how he does it, but I know a bit about the technique of painting with light. And so today we're going to emulate a little bit of his technique and try to create a beautiful paint with light painterly image. Now, most commonly when people create paint with light photographs, they do so with nothing more than a flashlight. You can keep this really, really inexpensive. It can be just a couple of dollars. Now, what's nice about these is they're lightweight and they're inexpensive, but they do have a couple downsides. Now, one downside is that different flashlights will have different white balances. So for example, this one is on the cooler side. It's these really, really blue LED lights. And so of course that changes the color and white balance in your image. The other downside is that many of them that are inexpensive, the ones that aren't going to cost you a lot of money, they're not necessarily super strong power, which is often no problem because then what you can do with your camera settings is you can shoot a high ISO and a wide aperture. However, I just picked up a brand new tool and I wanted to put it to use, and so today we're going to be using the B10x. Now, you may be familiar with the B10 and the B10 Plus because they are great, powerful, battery-powered strobes made by Profoto. Now, the new X series, they just came out, and the difference is that they have faster recycle times, they have a few other perks, but one of the things that got me excited is that they have 30% brighter modeling lights. Now, that's one of the things that was really appealing about the Profoto B10s and B10 Pluses, is that yes, they are strobes, and yes, they're portable strobes, but they also have powerful modeling lights. And they're bicolor, which means I can shoot them either really, really warm, so go for more of a tungsten feel, or I can shoot them more daylight, a little bit cooler. And so that's one of the capabilities of this. It's a strobe and a constant light, and now it's 30% brighter. And so that got me excited and got me thinking, and since I got this new tool and it has this new capability, let's use it to paint with light. With all of that being said, let's look at 3 essential things you need for your paint with light images. So first of all, your first consideration is that you need to eliminate ambient light. You need to get rid of any light in your scene. So that may be from a lamp or light coming in through windows or even the light from your laptop. Do whatever you can to get rid of all of the light. Now, when you are shooting with a flashlight, you probably have to shoot at a wider aperture and a higher ISO, which makes your sensor really sensitive to light, which means like I said, like the light from the laptop might show up. However, if I can use a brighter light source, in this case I'm going to use the B10X, I don't need to shoot so wide open, I don't need to shoot at the high ISO, so what that means is I don't have to worry as much about the ambient light. The second consideration is that you have to have a tripod, for sure, a nice, stable tripod, because you're going to be shooting at extremely long exposures. 1 second, 2 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds. So of course you can't just hand hold this. Now you could try to brace on something like a table or a chair, but honestly, tripod's going to be your best bet because you can control your compositions better. The third thing that you need to have is some way to achieve your long exposures. So for example, you'll be shooting perhaps on a manual exposure, and then you can manually set your shutter speed. So you could shoot at 5 seconds, 10 seconds, or whatever you deem is the right exposure, the right length of time. But you can also use something called a cable release and set your camera to bulb. And what bulb means is as long as you are pressing your shutter, you're actually exposing your sensor to light. So with a little cable release, I can lock it in place and leave it for 5 minutes, 10 minutes if I wanted. I don't think that's going to be necessary for what we're doing here today, but just know that it is an option, especially if you're doing paint with light on a big scene. But here, everything is going to be compact and we're going to create a nice fashion beauty portrait. Okay, so now you know the 3 essential things you have to consider when you're prepping for your paint with light image. But let me actually start to get set up here. So I've got my B10x, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use 2 tools. I'm going to modify this in 2 ways. I'm actually going to use a grid, and so this is the grid holder, and I've actually popped a grid in there already. And what this will allow me to do is have a little bit more focused beams of light, which I think will help me make the image look more painterly. Because if I'm just lighting the entire scene, I can't create brush strokes. And so having a grid here will allow me to maybe create little slices of light on the subject and on the background. Now, chances are, I don't think that this grid is going to be tight enough. That's one of the benefits of using a flashlight, is you can get just these little slices of light. So in addition to the grid, I may either use a snoot, which will give me a little bit more focused beam of light, or I will use something called cinefoil. And cinefoil is fundamentally, it's black tin foil, it's made for light, but I can make my own snoot. Now, if you have a snoot, great, but what's really nice about these is you can actually make a really small opening of light. So if I want a tiny brush stroke, all I need to do is squeeze the end of the cinefoil. So I believe that's how I'm going to be setting up my paintbrush. All right, so let's talk about my camera setup. Of course, I'm going to have my camera on a tripod, and I am using a carbon fiber Manfrotto tripod, and I'm going to be shooting with the Canon R5 and the Canon RF 24-105 lens. Now in a moment, what we're going to do is we're going to have to turn off all of the ambient light. And the reason we have to do that, right, is it's going to show up in our exposure. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to bring over my camera, I'm going to set up my composition and get focus on my subject. Once my subject is in focus, I'm going to switch to manual focus on my lens. The reason being is once we turn off those lights, as soon as I go to take another picture, if I'm on autofocus, it starts searching and it can never find that focus again. Frequently what I do is, if we're in the dark, we'll pop a flashlight or the light source onto my subject before I take the frame, refocus, and then switch back to manual. So it's something that I have to do to make sure that my subject hasn't moved and the image is sharp. So I'm going to get my composition, I'm going to make sure I have my focus, and then it's completely experimentation. I need to figure out what the right exposure is. So I'm going to give myself, I don't know, maybe 8 seconds to do some paint with light on my subject. And then I need to figure out, based on the power of my flashlight or the B10x, I need to figure out what the right combination of ISO and aperture are. In this case, I believe I'm going to start off maybe at ISO 200, and I'll start off maybe at f11. What's nice about that is that combination is going to already get rid of most ambient light in the room, so I don't have to worry about a little light leaking in from the windows. So let me set up my composition, and then it's time to turn the lights off and experiment. Okay, so let's start with getting that composition right. You're perfect. And give me a little bit of negative space on this side. Perfect, just like that's great. All right, let's do 8 seconds. Let's do f11, ISO 200. Let's try something like that. Okay. I'm just guessing, I have no idea. It's probably, I don't know, too bright, too dark, I don't know. We have to test it. And this is going to look totally overexposed because of course we have on all of the lights on me, so this is not what it will actually look like. And I'm gonna lock in my focus on her. So clicking on her face, locking in that focus, and then switching back to manual focus on my lens. Okay, that's good so far. And I'm on manual exposure, yep, 8 seconds, f11, ISO 200 to start off. And by the way, I have her seated because I'm trying to reduce as much wiggle as possible. I am going to make sure that when I light her with my paint with light source, that I only light each part of her face once. Because if I go over her face and she moves a little bit, then I go over it again, it's just going to be blurry and she'll look like she has, 3 eyes. So I have her seated in that chair so that she doesn't move, but I also have to make sure I only light her once. All right, I think that is pretty good, so I'm ready to try my very first exposure. And so what we're going to do is we're going to turn off all of the ambient light. I am going to press that shutter. Now if you look straight forward into the camera, here we go. I have 8 seconds. Okay, let's see how we did. Way too bright. Instead of f11, maybe I'll do like f16 and let's do ISO 100 instead, which will block out ambient light even more because I've got a little light coming in from the window. And That'll make sure I'm not overexposed. So let's try another one. Here we go. And I'm gonna hide the light till I get out there. Here we go, 8 seconds. Okay, so the exposure is much better. A couple of things, I can actually see my light in the lower left-hand side of the frame. So that's why basically if I'm moving around and I don't want it to be seen, I gotta hold it against me or just block it or turn it off. And then I must have somehow cast my shadow on the left, so I wanna be careful of that. But it's amazing because it looks like she was lit like a strobe. Problem is, my point is that I want it to be painterly. So I am going to add that cinefoil so that I can give myself the little, like the tiny streaks of light. So I'm gonna add the cinefoil on the front as my variation to this one, which means I may need to turn up the power of the modeling light in case it gets a little bit too dark, so we'll see. So I'm gonna light her face first. Here we go. Ooh, pretty. You can see that now that I narrowed the beam of light, when I kind of paint on the background, you see more just little slices of that light. And the light even on her face is a little bit more restricted. I think I'm going to purposely introduce motion blur, not to her face, but to her body. So what I'll do is I'll light her face, then have her move her body a little bit while I'm painting the background. Okay, so let's try this again. 1, 2, and 3. Here we go. Lighting her face. Okay, now wiggle. Cool. All right, so let's do you have your, can you grab your little fan? I figure why not? All right, I'm ready. You wanna give it a try? Here we go. Ready? 1, 2, and 3. Yeah, it's cool. Those images are so different and so creative, and that's what I love about this technique, is that as you're creating the images and painting, you never know what's going to happen, what they're going to look like, but sometimes that mystery and the mistakes you make makes images that look even more creative. And so, if you want to see more images that are painterly and painterly portraits, you're going to want to visit learnwithlindsay.com, and specifically my monthly membership platform, Learn Plus, because I have an upcoming episode all about creating images inspired by paintings. Now, if you want to see the gear used in this video and check out the brand new Profoto B10x, you're going to want to check out the links in the description below and visit Adorama.com. And of course, if you want to see more of these creative techniques, be sure to like and subscribe. See you next time.